Good afternoon, or is it good morning? Good afternoon to all of you. Time has flown. So very quickly, I think it's useful to introduce everyone, because it then just gives a context to why we are talking about the government, corporate, and leisure sectors. I'm Lindiwe Sangweni-Siddo. I'm the COO of the City Lodge Hotels. And to my left, I have Otto de Vries, known to all of you. He is the CEO of Asata, the Association of Southern African Travel, and is also a board member of TBCSA. He also wears board membership of the World Travel Agents Association Alliance, so really has different stakeholders that I'm sure when we start talking would have leaned into some of the conversation that we'll have today. Left to Otto, I have Mr. Phale Naake, also known to many of us. Phale, you're in the hot seat today, cost containment, the memo, I'm just warning. But we've had the pleasure of dealing, many of us, with Phale Naake. He is the Director of Strategic Procurement for Government Travel Services in the National Treasury of South Africa. And really, as I said, he's known to many of us, and during 2020 and the pandemic stages, Phale was at the end of all of our phones. And then further to Phale's left is Mr. Glenton de Kock, also very well known in the industry. He's the CEO of SAACI, the Southern African Association for the conference industry, but also a board member of the TBCSA. Glenton also comes with immense experience in various aspects of strategic business development, the regulatory government environment, and so on, and will really also help us in this conversation when it comes to discussing the points of MICE. So to kick it off, I thought, maybe it's a little bit of an old song. We keep referring to the pandemic and what we went through, but sometimes they say debriefing is also part of getting over the trauma that some of us may all have experienced. We lost all the business. We literally, those of us in the different aspects of the value chain, whether we're in accommodation, travel, transportation, wherever you were, the impact was felt. And in our lingo, we would talk about market segments, and we'd refer particularly to key market segments such as the corporate, government, and leisure market segments. All of them went dry. If we recall, during that period, those dark pandemic days, it was actually repatriation business that brought a little bit of glimmer of light to some of the accommodation providers, South Africans who were being brought back into the country. And again, it dried up, and then essential services started. But really, the light bulb moment for all of us, or the light at the end of the tunnel, was when the restrictions for domestic travel were lifted, and we saw the leisure market come to light. And that really was the saving grace in those very difficult times. To the extent that I think we had actually never really paid enough attention to the leisure market. We had underestimated its ability to actually carry us through a very difficult time when even the international market was not coming in. Otto, maybe just give us your reflections. I'm sure you've talked to stakeholders in your stead of where we are when we compare 2019 to where we are today in 2023, particularly in respect to the corporate, government, and leisure segments.
Sure. I think just to kick off on the leisure side, to your point around how we probably haven't really taken care of that, but I think the leisure component in domestic tourism has always been a very disjointed. South Africans have a tendency to make their own arrangements. A large portion of domestic tourism is based on VFR. We know that timeshare is extremely popular. In a certain category, you've got a lot of people that own their own holiday homes. It is a bit more complex in terms of, and I think Joe de Beer summed it up brilliantly yesterday with Stats SA highlighting how incredibly difficult it is to actually measure domestic tourism, or any form of tourism for that matter, not only because of the long tail effect, but I think also as a result of the inability for us to maybe have a full view an holistic view of exactly what's happening. So from our perspective as Asata, as the Association of Southern African Travel Agents, we can only measure data based on what is happening within our member base. Now, fortunately, within the organized travel sector, which is focusing primarily on corporate, government, and leisure travel, we are representing around just over 90% of the market in terms of market share. So we are fairly confident that the data is speaking to what is actually happening in the marketplace in terms of organized travel. And what we've picked up is that, as a little bit of data points for all of you, travel in the three categories we spoke of, corporate, government, and leisure, corporate makes up about 56% of the turnover in terms of the travel agent or the travel management company environment. Government makes up about 21%, so it's a substantial component. And then, of course, leisure, which is about 23%. But this is where we're starting to see some interesting things happening. And it was highlighted and alluded to yesterday as well. We've got about a 70 to 80% recovery on 2019 in terms of corporate travel. But what we are seeing is longer stays and an increase in spend, but that's also partially inflation driven. And there's also been a higher spend towards premium products, but that's starting to flatten out now, I think, as the inflationary pressure continues to mount. But the real spend has been up on flight and accommodation for corporates. The car hire remains subdued, but that's primarily because of supply and demand challenges. On the government side, it's about a 50 to 60% recovery. The spend is flat, and there's a slightly higher spend on the accommodation side. The car rental, the impact is identical in terms of all three of these sectors. And then finally, on the leisure side, that's absolutely boomed. So we're looking at about 120% of 2019 in terms of leisure bookings. And the patterns are not dissimilar to what we're seeing in the corporate space, with longer stays, increase in spend, and spend on accommodation is up as well. So that's kind of where we're finding ourselves at this moment.
It's very interesting about leisure, recovering 120% from 2019. Would there be an element of pleasure in that, a combination of what we've seen, evolve into sort of your traveling business person Absolutely. Who combines it with leisure?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a trend. And the opportunity to be able to work remotely
yes.
has also really encouraged people to think and operate differently. And, we talk about everybody having to be back at the office, but the fact is a lot of semigration did happen.
Yes.
And what is happening now is people are having to fly back to the office whilst they are actually operating or working in a different environment and traveling back to the office to have certain, obviously, critical internal meetings.
So the hybrid working environment has definitely, in some way or the other, benefited our industry. I'll come to you now, Phale. And really, we all know what an important role government plays in our tourism sector across the entire value chain. I think that's been the topic of discussion in terms of flights, transport, accommodation, etc. And I think it was mentioned by previous speakers. We also look to government to be that player that also stimulates and spends and allows the economy to grow. Given that South Africa is currently in a very sort of flat state when it comes to growth, and there has been very little, if none, in terms of growth, in light of this cost containment memo that came out, where really all stakeholders are now aware that it's been confirmed. Government has given a directive that there should be a cost containment process, and it's clearly outlined that specifically accommodation and travel will be minimized. Maybe I think it's a useful opportunity to shed some light on that. We've already heard that there's been a 50% or so recovery of government business. It looks like those numbers are likely to go backwards. Could you enlighten and maybe clarify what the impact of this memorandum is going to have?
Thank you very much. And let me start by indicating that the concept of cost containment in government started around 2013-2014 financial year. And that's when government started to look at the fiscus, the spending, and the revenue generation that the country is having. And then started to say, in terms of Chapter 13 of the Constitution, which mandate National Treasury to ensure that there is transparency, accountability, and sound financial controls of the public purse. Now, in implementing that and looking at the spending of government and the revenue collection, then government came up with the concept of cost containment. As you can recall, travel-related cost containment was published in 2017-2018, revised in 2018-2019, and then since then was not revised until I revised it around last year. And that was in order to keep into play the dynamics that are there. The increase in fuel, the increase in taxes, in the increases on the inflation, and so on and so forth. But with the current, I heard the CEO of Sun Park when he was here was saying, there is an email making rounds. Let me confirm that it's not email and information making round. It is a decision of National Treasury after consultation. On the 15th of August, National Treasury went to Cabinet to brief Cabinet on three things. One, our economic growth, which is actually negatively impacting on revenue collection. And then looking at the spend of government as a whole, an assessment was then made to say, we need to do something. After briefing Cabinet then took a decision to say, can you go and work out something? Work out with HODs, DGs, and all relevant stakeholders, and come up with measures that are going to help us sustain the pressure that we are currently in. FOSAT, which is a forum of the DGs, the Ministers' Committee on Budget, and also the Budget Committee, were then briefed in terms of the current situation that we are. And then went back and report to Cabinet, and Cabinet said, National Treasury, you now go to all institutions, work out with them something that is going to help us to go out of this situation. Hence, by Thursday, the 31st of August, letters were then written to all DGs, HODs of provincial treasuries, which will then cascade to provincial departments and government public institutions. And the letter was saying, with the current situation that we are faced with, we collected lower than that we have focused in February when the budget was tabled, and will not be able to sustain the current process right up to the end of the financial year. So hence the letter then issued and said there will be a freeze on travel and give conditions that would allow travel to continue. So coming back to what you have asked on how are we going to continue to make sure that there is travel and we also support the tourism sector. The letters are not saying it's a total no travel in government. Travel will still continue to be there in government, but it will not be as it was focused, that it will be at that level, because now we will be unable to spend as we have planned in February. So we had to reduce traveling and traveling costs in government so as to save a little of what is left to can sustain the government. One other thing that actually contributed muchly to this is, as indicated in the letter and also which is available, is that the issue of the high wage bill demand, load shedding, the none or minimal growth in the economy has actually contributed negatively to the revenue collection. And that is a fact. But the question then becomes, how do we then move towards? And we had to come up with a balancing act. Protect the fiscus of the country, but also keep the economy going.
So I'm going to come back to you because I think that's key. That we all understand, I think it is a reality that this is a decision that has been made by government. But you also have a stakeholdership in front of you who is very reliant on government being a market segment. And when I come back, I want to follow up in the next round on what are you then as National Treasury going to do to ensure that you engage and consult with the travel stakeholdership, with the tourism sector, to make sure that we all understand and work together through this period while you're trying to recover. I'll come back to you on that, Phale. I want to then go to Glenton to say, in light of what Phale has just told us, it then makes sense that we all, I guess, have to really start concentrating on other market segments. The conferencing market segment is often driven by government. And we've heard now that clearly government conference business is going to diminish. From where you sit as the CEO of SAACI and in the space of conferences and conventions and MICE, what are your views in terms of how we can then drive and carry our industry forward by really focusing on the MICE sector?
I think my citizen response here is keep the damn lights on. Can we keep the lights on? Like we can have no load shedding. Because ultimately that affects all of us. Whether you're in manufacturing, mining, at home this evening, some of us won't be able to watch the rugby because of load shedding. So I think as a citizen, my response outside of my day job is to keep the lights on. We'll have happier citizens because we know there's electricity. But I think from a meetings and events perspective, some of our properties, some of our products, and some of our regions around the country, with a circular like this, will be so harshly affected that you're going to go back 2 years when we had a hard stop. Because I'm trying to rationalize the sense of saying that as of the 15th of September, if we were going to have this meeting as a government department on the 16th of September, it's a hard stop. So there's still a cost issue there in terms of cancellations in that regard. So our view within the meetings and events space is quite simplistic to say that as we did throughout the pandemic, and just to put context in terms of where I'm going with my input as such, is the fact that a year ago to this month, we then had no restrictions. So no limitations in terms of number of people. I mean, all of us have been hugging each other, we're close together. So it's a year ago that we've been able to see recovery, and the bounce back has been quite significant for ourselves. So to give you a simple indication, Ladies Cricket World Cup, Netball World Cup, Formula E, Mining in Durban, Meetings Africa, we had ProPac, Africa Energy Week, BRICS. So there's been significant movement in that. And then you add to it, we had Sting, Imagine Dragon, UB40. So across the meetings and event space, you've seen significant growth and quick bounce back, so that at a government level, if you were properly sitting right here, and we've said it to our members as well, and you've got a high proportion of government work in terms of meetings and events, our appeal to you is try and limit that, because it's going to hurt you. Right? So again, go back to a citizen. We should applaud government for managing their spend, right? But as an industry, it actually affects us. So I think as a stakeholder, and the Minister of Home Affairs was quite clear yesterday, we're not enemies, we have a responsibility. And I think as an industry, part of me would be quite naughty here now and say to National Treasury, so part of that cost containment, are we going to say to the motor industry, we're not going to support incentives, for instance? Because if that happens, then unions will come to the party, the industry global will come to the party and put pressure on government And I've said it as well, and Chief knows it. We're too nice as an industry when it comes to an issue like this. You know, we don't come on and say, listen, as a GDP contributor, how do we find a solution? And we must find the solution because, as I said, we see the recovery in the meetings and events space, but there are certain parts of our country that is not recovering as quickly as we should do that. And government's got a key role to play to that, particularly in the meeting space, particularly in the travel space as such. So I think my appeal is very simple. We respect the circular, but I think we've built a very solid bridge at the moment that as stakeholders, we must find that common ground to find the solution. To go forward from there.
So Phale, you play a very difficult role because the minute you wear the government hat, you're speaking for all of government, where really yours is a national treasury role. How far does your role go in terms of now carrying out a roadshow where you can engage with the stakeholders? A lot of the players in the tourism industry would have long budgeted different market segments. This announcement comes in the middle of financial year periods, which means there has to be a reshuffle of where other market segments are going to close the gap. Is there a planned a roadshow or some sort of communication that will go beyond this discussion that we're having here, that others will have clarity about what you're telling us?
If you can note the past two days announcement is that the minister has actually moved the medium-term budget policy statement. It's no longer in October, it has moved to the first week of November. And it's just because to allow that consultation that still has to take place. Because currently it's measures that are put in place, but there is further consultation that still has to take place. So there is an office in National Treasury, Public Finance Management Office, headed by Dr. Mampo, who is running the consultation process and engage further so that come the time when the minister is going to table medium-term budget policy statement, parties has been engaged, and a position that the minister is going to table is what has been canvassed and been negotiated with relevant stakeholders.
I think that's useful, and I think it would be great if we could see that consultation process following up.
Yeah.
Otto, coming back to you, often in our industry, it's not just occupancies that we look at. We also look at average room rates, we look at the RevPAR, we look at the total spend of our guests. Can you take us also through what conversations are taking place in respect of public holidays? Public holidays, depending on where you are sitting, can be a lovely thing for a family weekend away, if it is a long weekend. But if it's a public holiday that is flat bang in the middle of a week, like Women's Day, 9th of August was on a Wednesday this year, that is when our industry then sees the bottom come out, and typically peak weeks become actually loss-making weeks. What could you sort of shed light on in terms of the trends that we see other countries dealing with public holidays in order to maximize as many business days that we can for the industry to make hay while the sun shines?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's more relevant now than ever in light of the fact that domestic leisure tourism is outperforming. And in light of what's coming from Treasury as well, it's evident that there would be a massive opportunity for South Africa as a market from a domestic leisure perspective to maximize public holidays in a more structured manner. So it's not uncommon in countries like the United Kingdom, United States, Argentina, and others, where what they do is they align public holidays with the weekend. So outside of obviously your Christmas and your New Year, which are driven very much by date, there is an opportunity here for us to consider shifting the celebration day, the public holiday itself, to either fall on a Friday or a Monday, whichever is closest to the original official date. The opportunity is there because what it means is that without having to take any leave, you're going to get an extra day on your weekend. And that's going to extend opportunities for people to take away long weekends and actually to travel and to spend money on leisure travel. I think from a hotel and accommodation perspective, your corporate is from, the Monday to Thursday type of thing. So that is a perfect add-in for you as well, to have a consistency in terms of higher occupation opportunities. So, we would be looking to put forward a proposal for the government to consider making changes to the Act around public holidays that will allow for that alignment to take place together with weekends. And we could even take it a little bit further. We won't go into that today, but even with the school holidays, when they were staggered by different provinces, what you had was a long tail in terms of opportunities for people to travel at different times. Now everybody's going on holiday at exactly the same time, and it's placing pressure on the infrastructure on every level, from roads to accommodation, etc. So, I think there would be a lot of value if we staggered the holidays again as well.
So clearly that becomes one of the sort of action points out of this session, that we would say our associations like TBCSA, Asata, and many others could really push this submission that has been made, and I think that is a wonderful proposal. Parting shots. Any closing from my team members here?
Yeah. Parting shot. I like what the Minister of Home Affairs said. We are not working against each other. But we have different responsibilities. So from National Treasury perspective, we have the responsibility to guard the fiscus and make sure that the public purse is managed and used accordingly. We are in this together. We should see how we navigate this terrain together. But at the end, we will get there.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better. It's a collaborative effort, and I think that has been the theme that has been driving this whole conference. Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments and the conversation. Thank you to the audience.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks, buddy. Thank you. Thanks, buddy.